I started woodworking, sharpening was one of those things that was intimidating and also kind of one of those things that you wish that you could always buy. I know that you can buy really sharp saw blade, router bits, and it seemed like every time I went to sharpen my chisel, I either threw off the bevel completely or they just weren't that much sharper than when I started. So what do you need to get sharp tools every single time you sharpen? Some of you might have seen other sharpening videos and you think that you need a honing guide, you need a tarmac machine, you need special jigs. But today I wanna really focus on the skill of hand sharpening. Now, I have a honing guide and on occasion I use it. I too, when I was first starting out, thought I needed to get certain jigs or a honing guide was the key to my success, and it's true, these things do help. But when I finally just sat down and struggled through learning to hand sharpen, it made my life so much easier, and as a result, it made woodworking so much more enjoyable when I could efficiently and quickly sharpen a tool within a minute to 2 minutes tops. Now I have a sharpening board in front of me and I really only use 600 to 1200 grit stones. I do have some 200, 400, and 600 grit stones. I have a really cheap diamond plate that I got from Harbor Freight, but I rarely have to go below 600 grit. That's because if you stay on top of sharpening your blades, you really don't need the lower grits. A lot of times I won't even touch the 600, I'll just sharpen on the 1200 just to really hone that edge. I want to talk a little bit about blade geometry. Now, typically the angle of a chisel, that is the bevel angle, is between 25 and 30 degrees. Now, for a chisel that you're going to be doing a lot of mortising with, it's advisable to make that angle steeper. That basically gives you more meat behind your edge, and it's going to keep it from wearing down as you're pounding on it, mortising. Now, if you have a chisel that's specialized for paring or doing really finesse work, you can sharpen your bevel down to 20 degrees, 18 degrees. The exact angles don't really matter. Now, here's where a honing guide does make sense to set your initial bevel. Now, the way a honing guide works is your blade is set a certain distance from this edge. And on the back of this honing guide, for instance, it tells me that for a chisel to have a 30-degree angle, I need to be 30 millimeters away. Now, I already know that this is going to be 30 degrees. This is going to be 25 degrees. Now, if you have a chisel straight from the factory, the bevel angle is probably already set somewhere between 25 and 30 degrees. So the honing guide isn't super necessary. Now, if you botched some hand sharpening and your bevel is way out of square, then these things come in handy. I want to share a little secret, and this made a huge difference when I finally did this. And it's going to seem almost too simple. Just slow down. Really. A big mistake that novice sharpeners make is you go too fast before you actually have the mechanics locked in. And just like with weightlifting or with gymnastics or any other kind of physical activity, before you can incorporate speed into the activity, you have to have accuracy and repeatability. This is a Harbor Freight chisel, and this one's a little bit beat up. I've neglected it. Looks like it has some stain on it, but the angle is more or less okay, and I'm gonna sharpen this one up. So here I have some window cleaner, and I'm gonna start on this 600 grit stone, and you can see here my sharpening board it has a French cleat on it, and it's locked into the vise so it doesn't move. Now, you don't need one of these. You can use one of those little grippy mats. This is the part where it pays to really slow down. So you can set your chisel onto the plate and just really try to look to see where it's registering perfectly flat with the face. Now from here, you have a couple different options. For some of the wider chisels, I tend to use 2 fingers on both sides of the blade like this, trying to put even pressure on 2 sides. For these narrower chisels, what I'll do is I'll typically have just one hand with my index finger pressed here, and then I'll have this right hand with my index finger pressing like this. Now what I'm gonna do here is I'm not gonna sharpen along the whole bevel. So here I can see that it's perfectly flat. I'm gonna raise it up slightly and give myself a secondary bevel that's a little bit steeper than this primary. So the name of the game here is to get into a comfortable position and see if you can do the same stroke without shifting the angle of the chisel, going as slow as you need to make this consistent. Here's a good time to check. You can see here I'm slightly out of square actually, so I need to apply a little bit more pressure to the right side. Now if you go slow like this and give yourself consistent feedback, you'll catch any mistakes in your sharpening technique before they become big mistakes and they take a lot longer to correct. Here you can see that's my secondary bevel that I just set, and it's a good idea if you're just starting out to count the strokes. So do 10 strokes and check where your bevel is. If it's off, count 10 more strokes and see if you can get it back to square. Here, I'm still going slow, like I'm starting out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Check my bevel and do 10 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And this is typically the speed that I would go at, but again, if you're starting out, don't try to go fast. Try to build that muscle memory before you start going fast. I'm gonna flatten the back on this. And at this point, I have a pretty good burr on this, but I'm gonna leave it be and go through my grits and wait till I get to the strop to actually remove the burr. So now moving on to this 1200 grit stone, which probably now is more like a 2000 grit stone because of the wear. So again, I'm gonna try to find that secondary bevel and go nice and slow. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so it's important to note to always try to use the full width of your stone. Now, diamond plates won't groove out in the middle like a water stone will, but still you want to sharpen along the full width of the stone, because what eventually happens to diamond plates is that the grit will become finer. So if you spend all your time in the middle, you're gonna have sides that are different grit than the middle, and it's gonna give you an uneven sharpness. So don't spend all your time in the center. Get out to those sides. So same thing here, I'm just really focusing on the pressure, and I'm checking my secondary bevel to make sure that it's square. And this is where you really want to just spend the time, take the time to get this right. If you do, 5 or 10 strokes and you just correct as you go, before you know it, you'll program that muscle memory in and you'll be able to go a lot faster and you won't have to check as often. So this is what it would look like at speed. Now I probably did more strokes than I needed to there, but a lot of times when I'm going fast, I can do, 50 strokes and it's really not that big a deal. So I have a nice burr buildup and I'm gonna do some strokes on the back now. This is also gonna help separate that burr and it's gonna help flatten the back of the chisel. Sure that's even. All right, so now that burr hasn't come off completely. You can see that burr there, and now I'm gonna take it off on the strop. All right, so for this blade, that's really it on the sharpening plates. And you can see how fast this process goes when you start getting up to speed. Even if you go slowly, it's not really gonna take you more than 5 minutes, and that's if you're being really meticulous. Now, the honing strop is something that I thought was a little bit ridiculous when I started woodworking. I thought, what is rubbing my chisel or plane iron across a piece of leather gonna do? Is that really gonna change the sharpness of it? And I kind of didn't think that it would work. I mean, that might sound funny to some of you guys, but I honestly was skeptical. But then my brother convinced me to try a strop, and ever since I did, I've never gone without one. So basically the way that a strop works is there is polishing compound. Now, I don't have my stick of green polishing compound in front of me, but this piece of leather has a lot of this compound still on there, and basically this is like car polishing compound. It's really, really fine grains that just help give your edge a mirror finish. And what stropping does is it not so much removes material from your blade's edge, but imagine if you were to take a super, super up close image of the edge of your chisel. It's gonna look like a bunch of frayed hairs, and they're not all perfectly aligned. Now, what happens to those frayed strands and hairs and jagged edges is the stropping brings them together to a final apex. And there's a really cool website called The Science of Sharp that has some up close imagery of before and after stropping, and they have probably way more information and in-depth info on stropping and tests and sharpening technique than you would ever practically use. But nonetheless, it is really interesting to look at. So if you have some free time, head over to The Science of Sharp and check out some of their cool macro photography. It's really pretty incredible. So on the strop, my technique is really simple. I like to get the edge to that secondary bevel. Now the strop is soft, so I don't want to go too steep on it because I'm going to be digging that edge a little bit too far into it. So I lay down so that the primary bevel is pretty much flat, and then as I press into the strop, it's still going to get that secondary bevel and everything that comes with it. And the way that I like to hold it is I put my hand like this on the chisel, and I basically just do anywhere between 20 to 50 fast strokes and go something like this. So that was about 50 strokes, and that burr is just about removed. I'll do a couple strokes on the back, and here I am just ever so slightly pressing that edge into the strop, but mostly keeping the chisel flat. And that removed the burr perfectly. And now I have a nice mirror finish. Now there's a lot of ways to test for sharpness. Some people will cut end grain and see how it cuts end grain. I think those are all really nice tests. What I like to do, because it's just simple and I really get a sense of how keen and fine my edges, is I do a hair cutting test. So I'll just take a random spot on my arm and I'll see if my chisel or plane iron can cut hair, and I know if it can cut hair, it can cut wood. So there we are, cutting hair, no problem. You can also do the paper cutting test, which is another favorite. So if you're new to sharpening, I hope this video inspired you to just go out there and try. You don't need a lot of fancy jigs, fixtures, tools. You really just need a couple basic stones or diamond plates. I think I got these two for a total of between $50 and $80 on Amazon. The most important thing you take from this video is to just keep trying. Treat this as any other type of muscle memory skill. Get it into your body, and before you know it, you'll be sharpening chisels, planes in under a minute, and it's gonna make woodworking just so much more enjoyable. See you guys next time.